Welcome to Fun Story Fridays. I, your host, Mr. Tall, will be telling you a story, an interesting story from history. I thought from home instruction, we haven't had a lot of good interaction, and I haven't had the ability to tell you any fun stories recently. So tonight, I'd like to start out with a story of Adrian Carton de Wiart, an English war hero who gained acclaim from his exploits from the Second Boer War all the way through the Second World War. I'd like to start my story back in his youth. Adrian, like I said, was born to an aristocratic family in Brussels in Belgium. He was born on May 5th in 1880. His father was Belgian and a lawyer. His mother was Irish. Just after his 6th birthday, his mother passed away, and his father moved the entire family to Cairo, Egypt. In 1891, his father thought he needed a much better education, and so he sent him to a boarding school in England. And later, he went to go study law at Oxford at the heeding of his father. Now, Adrian was never big on school, and so at the first opportunity for war, he jumped at it. Now, this happened on the 11th of October in 1899, when the Second Boer War broke out between England and South Africa. Now, Carton Adrian was not yet of age, nor was he a British citizen, and so he could not join the British Army. Now, he employed a really clever tactic called lying, and he created a fake name and wrote down that he was 25 years old, and they shipped him out to war. Now, his father still believed that he was studying law at Oxford. Now, a quote from Adrian said, at that moment that he signed up for war, he said, "I knew once and for all that war was in my blood, and if the British didn't fancy me, I would offer myself to the Boers." Luckily, the British did fancy him. Now, he went straight to South Africa, and very early on in his fighting career, he and his unit were crossing a river in full view of Boer commandos, Boer warriors, and he was shot twice, in the stomach and in the groin. Now, after he was shot, one of his superiors bluntly asked him, he said, "Were there many Boers about?" And Adrian replied coolly, "No, but the few that were there were very good shots." Now, at a hospital, he was discovered to be Belgian and too young to be a war. And more importantly, his father found out that he was not at school studying. Now, his father was angry, but nonetheless, he acquiesced and allowed Adrian to pursue his career in the military. And in 1901, he returned to South Africa for another round of fighting. Now, he joined a cavalry regiment, which meant he was on horseback, and he was promoted to corporal. Now, this wasn't long lasted, as for 24 hours later, he was demoted once again for threatening a superior, a sergeant. Now, the Boer War ended in 1902, and de Wiart didn't do much in this time during the war. The one thing he was allowed to do was cut some barbed wire. Now, the Second Boer War ended, and in 1907, Adrian became a British citizen. He was an aristocrat, and so the British were cool with that. And so he played around in England for a long time. He shot fowl and fox. He traveled to Europe. He also made time to marry to strengthen his connection to England. Now, his wife's name is fantastic. Her name is Frederique Maria Caroline Henriette Rosa Sabina Franziska Fugger von Babenhausen. Now, shortly after World War I broke out, which we should know started in 1914, and looking to get back into war as fast as possible, Adrian joined the battle effort and was quickly sent to British Somaliland, which is Somali today. And he was on the hunt for Mohammed bin Abdullah, who was colloquially known as Mad Mullah. Now, de Wiart was assigned to lead a squadron of Somali camel corps, meaning he was on camelback. And he was on the hunt for Mad Mullah. He was tasked with storming an enemy fort, and de Wiart could not resist going on the attack head first. He wanted to lead this assault. However, the enemy position was very well defended, and he was shot by the the enemy. He was shot 3 times in the face. One took him in the left ear, a second bullet got him in his left eye, and a third bullet ricocheted and once again got him in that same left eye. He lost that eye shortly after. Now, de Wiart's assessment of that battle, after losing his eyeball, he said, "It had been the most exhilarating fun." Now, Lord Ismay, one of his friends, also gave insight into Carton's innate love of fighting. He said, "I honestly believe that he regarded the loss of his eye as a blessing, as it allowed him to get out of Somaliland and go to Europe, where he believed the real fighting was." So, Carton de Wiart gained a Distinguished Service Medal for his actions in Somaliland. He also gained a glass eye. However, he really wasn't fond of this glass eye, and the story goes that he flung it out the window of a taxi and instead preferred to have a black eye patch. Now, in 1915, he was fighting on the trenches of the Western Front, and during the Second Battle of Ypres, his left hand was hit by an artillery shell and was completely shattered. Now, according to his memoirs, a doctor refused to amputate them, and so he tore the fingers, 2 of his fingers, off that hand, completely off. Later that year, a surgeon completely removed the mangled hand. Now, this one-handed, one-eyed man in 1916 was undeterred and seemingly somehow unimpaired. He wasn't able to be stopped. And he went on to fight in this Battle of the Somme, the biggest and bloodiest battle from the First World War. And men recalled seeing him pulling pins out of grenades with his mouth and chucking these grenades at the enemy, which I think is a fantastic image. Later on in the First World War, he assaulted the village of La Bourgeoisie, which I'm saying terribly, in France in 1916. 3 of the commanders of the 8th Battalion were killed. Now, Carton took charge of all 3 units, and without field radios or telephones or even carrier pigeons, he managed to communicate orders to these units, and he did this by bravely running back and forth through no man's land. And they actually managed to hold back the advancing enemy through his efforts alone. For his bravery, the 36-year-old Carton was awarded the Victoria Cross, which is the highest honor you can get in England. However, in his memoir, in his autobiography, he made no mention of ever getting this Victoria Cross. And he later said that it had been won by the 8th Battalion. It wasn't him. He said every man had done as much as I had. During 3 subsequent battles, he was shot in the ankle, hip, and leg, but he soon regained full mobility and was shortly discharged from the hospital. Now, his last wound from the First World War was when he was shot in the ear. Now, despite his loss of his eye and his hand and getting shot a myriad of times, he said, "Frankly, I had enjoyed the war." Now, after the end of the First World War, he then went to war in Poland. And in 1999, during this war, he survived not 1, but 2 plane crashes, one of which resulted in a brief period of him being a POW, a prisoner of war, in Lithuania. In August of 1920, he was on an observation train, meaning he was trying to do some scouting, when he was attacked by some Cossacks, the Polish army, by Cossack cavalry. Now, these Cossacks wanted to hijack the train, and he alone, single-handedly, literally single-handedly, with his revolver, managed to fight back these Cossacks. He fell out of the train onto the track, but leapt right back onto the train and killed the rest of the Cossacks who had boarded the train. Now, after the Polish Wars had ended, he decided to stay in Poland. He said he really liked it there. And in 1923, he actually decided to retire from war. He was done. He had gotten shot too many times, lost an eye, a hand. It was done. And so he had achieved the rank of Major General. And he wanted to, as a gentleman, enjoy his quiet life in this country. And he stayed here for 18 years until the Second World War broke out. So, De Wiart immediately enlisted in the Second World War, and in 1914 he was recalled into active service, meaning he was called to be a soldier again, an active soldier. And I should stress, in case you forgot, he is 61 years old. He is an amputee, and he is going into active service. He was given the rank of lieutenant general and tasked with leading an Anglo-French force into Norway to halt the German invasion. An Anglo-Norway force means the British are going to stop the Germans from invading in France. Now, this operation from the beginning was a complete disaster. When he arrived in Norway via seaplane, he was forced to crash land on a fjord, meaning he was forced to crash land, and he was immediately attacked by a German fighter plane. Now, rather than boarding a rubber dinghy, a rubber boat, and being a sitting duck on the water, he calmly instead waited in the wreckage of his burning plane until the enemy plane ran out of ammo, and afterwards they sent a much larger boat and pulled him back to shore. Now, in 1914, he was appointed by Winston Churchill, who was the leader of England during the Second World War, for a mission in Yugoslavia. However, he never made it to Yugoslavia. En route to Yugoslavia, his Wellington bomber, his plane, suddenly took a nosedive towards the Mediterranean. Now, I should note, this is his fourth plane crash. Took a nosedive towards the Mediterranean, and he and the British Air Force took refuge on the wing, meaning they waited on the wing of the ship while it was floating in the water. However, the main body of the ship started to sink. The 61-year-old Adrian Carton de Wiart helped an injured, struggling comrade swim a mile to shore. Now, as soon as they made it to the coastline, they were immediately captured by Italians. Carton was then sent to Vingliata Castle outside of Florence. And he was there one of 13 high-ranking officers who were prisoners. Now, he and the other prisoners refused to stay jailed and often tried to escape. They even dug a 60-foot tunnel through solid bedrock for a labor-intensive 7 months. And the 6 of them escaped in March of 1943. Now, as I was saying, he refused to stay jailed, and he and the other prisoners were determined, and so they dug up or excavated a 60-foot tunnel straight through solid bedrock, and this took 7 months. Now, they escaped in March of 1943. They were dressed as Italian peasants. But a one-handed man with a black eye patch is not really conspicuous. It's quite obvious. And so after 8 days, they were recaptured. Now, he was later released when the Italians switched sides, when they went to the Allied side. And Carton went to Rome with them to help negotiate with the Allies. Now, he later worked with Churchill and Chiang Kai-shek. Churchill, again, is a leader of England, and Chiang Kai-shek was a Chinese rebel leader. Now, we're not going to go too deep into this because I want to move on to his retirement, where in 1947, even when he retired, he was unable to escape injury. On his way back to England from China, he stepped off in Rangoon and he flipped down a flight of stairs, breaking his back and knocking himself unconscious. During his recovery, the doctors removed a huge amount of shrapnel from his war-torn body. Now, depending on your perspective, he's either the luckiest or the unluckiest soldier to have ever lived. And nonetheless, he really enjoyed his time throughout the entire war, and in 1963, he died at the age of 83. Now, thank you for joining me on the very first episode of Fun Time Stories. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you tune in next week for another great story when we talk about Carrie A. Nation and her war against alcohol. Have a great evening.